Today in our 2017 Jayco Redhawk Motorhome, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar, part number RM-1139-147. Here at eTrailer, we do see a lot of motorhomes, and one thing people may not realize is when we're going down the road, we have a giant windscreen here that's going to catch a lot of that wind. So when we're driving and that gust of wind comes, we're going to feel it in the steering wheel, and we're going to have to fight that to keep the wheel straight. Not only keep it straight, but whenever we do turn, it's going to have a lot of sway and kind of lean into it before we even get to our turn, which a lot of drivers may not feel comfortable with that. Well, that's why all these suspension upgrades are going to help not only make the ride better, but give us a lot more confidence and take away some of that fatigue when we're driving. And just like when you pull a trailer, if we're flat towing behind our motorhome, we have a lot of weight back there. So when we make a turn, the towed vehicle is going to want to push and pull the back end of our motorhome around. So upgrading the rear sway bar is going to give us a lot more control, and we're not going to have that fishtailing feeling effect when we're going down the road. So here's what our sway bar looks like once we have it installed. Now this is going to attach directly to the axle as well as on the side of the frame, so it's going to give us that stability and prevent that swaying back and forth, whether it be a crosswind or if we make an evasive maneuver. Our sway bar is going to use all polyurethane bushings, the bushings that are going to be on the axle, as well as on the end links. Now our Roadmaster sway bar is going to replace the factory one, and it is going to come with all the necessary hardware to get it in place. However, we are going to have to drill a hole through the frame of our motorhome because it's not going to be mounting in the same spot as the factory sway bar does. While we have our two bars next to each other, you can automatically see there's quite a bit of size difference. The new Roadmaster sway bar is going to be much thicker, which means it's not going to have so much tendency to flex or bend, so it's going to provide a lot more stability and have that rigid feeling. Not to mention, even our end links are going to be a lot bigger and thicker, again providing that really rigid structure. And instead of using rubber bushings like they do on our factory sway bar, we're going to have polyurethane bushings, which are going to hold up a lot better and provide a lot more stability instead of having that mushy feeling inside. To begin our installation, if you're going to be lifting your motorhome, you're going to want to lift it by the axle so that the suspension is at full load. We don't want it hanging down. And then we can come to the rear and we'll find our sway bar. It's going to be attached to the rear axle here. And if we follow it along the edge, we'll find our end links. Now the end links are going to be bolted to the side of the frame, and we're going to need to pull those out. We'll follow it up, and the bolt will be right on the inside. Now it is very limited on room here because our leaf springs are going to be right in the way. So it's going to be easiest to use a wrench, and a ratchet wrench helps, but you want to be mindful because you don't want to hit that leaf spring once you start loosening the bolt. So we're going to be using the open end of our wrench to break it loose and start loosening it up. And these are going to be 15mm head bolts. So we'll use a 15mm wrench. And you're just going to have some patience because there is very limited room. And on the inside of the frame where the bolt's going through, it's just going to be a plate welded with a nut on it, so we don't have to hold a wrench when we're loosening this. If you're having trouble getting the bolt all the way out because it's hitting the leaf spring, we have a couple different options of how we can do it. We can loosen up the U-bolt that's right here that would allow that top spring to move up out of the way, and then we can remove the bolt. Or if we come to the inside, we could cut this nut plate and take that bottom section that's hooked into the frame out, push the bolt in, and cut the bolt off since we're not going to be reusing this hardware. So with the bolt and nut plate removed from the end link, we're going to go ahead and remove the other side. Just keep in mind that once you remove the outer one on both sides, the only thing that's going to be holding our sway bar in place is those two clamps, so it may swing a little bit, but it'll hit the axle before it fully swings. Just keep in mind because you don't want it to come down and hit you. With both end links loose, you can see how our sway bar is going to have a little bit of movement. So now we can get ready to take out the clamps that are going on the axle. Now when we take these out, I'm going to go ahead and loosen the bolts up, but I'm going to leave at least one on each side. That way it doesn't come down because this is rather heavy and you probably want to get an extra set of hands. We're going to be using a 13mm socket. We're going to pull those bolts out. So we'll remove one, and then just have a couple threads on the other one. Before we get it all the way down, I do want to mention we are going to be reusing these bolts that go into the axle, so hold on to all 4 of those. Now that we have an extra set of hands, we're going to remove those 2 final bolts. If we kind of just pull down on the sway bar, we can lower it down, and we'll just set it down so it won't get damaged. Now with our 2 sway bars next to each other, we can get an idea of where we need to mount our bushings. Now our kit's going to come with new bushings and some lubricant to get everything in place. So just want to take a little bit of that lubricant. You want to make sure you have gloves on because this is rather messy. But we're just going to slide it all on the inside of that bushing. And it is a split bushing, so it's going to open up. And we'll just go around the bar and it'll slide right in place. Now we want to get it as close as we can to the factory location, but that's where the lubricant's going to come into play. If we need to move it just a little bit, we can. So we'll go ahead and put the other side on as well. Before we go to put our sway bar in place, I'd like to go over the hardware. We're going to have these clamps that are going to go around our bushings, and they'll just slide into place. And then we're going to take the factory bolts that we removed from the axle, but we're going to slide on one of the smaller washers on each one of the bolts before we put it in place. And again, it'd be a good idea to get an extra set of hands because this bar is going to be heavier than the factory one. So we're going to lift our sway bar into position. You can slide those bushings and brackets over as needed. And you're going to want to get the hardware at least loosely installed. Now you want to make sure that the bolts are fully seated, but you don't want to crank down on them just yet. You just want them snug so it'll support the bar. And you still can able to kind of pivot it and move it on an angle like this. Now we already have our bar in place. However, we're going to need to put Loctite on these bolts. So the easiest way to do that without having to redo everything is make sure that one of the bolts is snug. Then we're going to remove the other one. We can take our Loctite and we're just going to put a little bit on the threads, and then we're going to put the bolt back in place. Then we can repeat that, making sure that one's snug, and remove the other one. Doing one bolt at a time definitely beats taking the entire bar down and trying to wrestle it back into place. And we'll repeat that same process for the other side. Now, on the end of our sway bar here, we're going to put our end link. And our end link is going to go on the outside of the bar, towards the outside of the vehicle. So we're going to want to take one of our 1/2-inch bolts. We're going to slide a flat washer on it. We're going to go through our sway bar, through the end link. We'll put another flat washer in place. We're going to go through the end of the bar, put another flat washer, and then we're going to secure it down with a lock nut. Now right now, we just want to get them in place and make sure that we can get it rotated up. Doesn't matter if it's in that position right now because we're going to leave all this loose and we'll put the other one on the other side. With our end links loosely in place, we're going to want to make sure that the bar itself is as close to parallel with the ground as we can get it. And then we're going to rotate our end links so that they're straight up and down. And we're going to mark where the end link hole meets the frame. And once you make that mark, you can move the end link, and you're going to want to drill straight through the frame, and always double check the back side to make sure nothing's back there to cause any damage. But we want to drill at least a 1/2 inch, if not a 17/32, so we can fit a 1/2 inch bolt through. And now that I have a mark in my frame here, I know exactly where I need to drill. This is going to be where an extra set of hands is going to come in handy, because you're going to want to have the bar and the end link in the same spot, and then move to the other side and make a mark there. That way we can move the end links out of the way and drill all the way through the frame. So with both holes drilled in the frame, we're going to want to take our 1/2 inch bolts and double check that they'll fit through, and the hole is big enough. So just like on the bottom, we're going to take a flat washer, go over our bolt, then we're going to go through our end link, and then on the inside of the end link, we're going to grab another flat washer so the bolt goes through both of them, and then we'll line up our bolt with the hole, making sure it goes all the way through. Then we're going to follow it up on the inside with another flat washer and a lock nut. We'll go back and we're going to tighten up all of our hardware. So we'll start with the ones that are on the axle, again with our 13mm socket. I'm going to torque these to the value specified in the instructions. Now for the end links, since it has very limited space, we'll be using a 3/4 inch socket and wrench to hold the bolt on the outside. And we're going to tighten these down to the specified amount in the instructions. We'll make sure to repeat that for all of our remaining hardware. That'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar, part number RM-1139-147 on our 2017 Jayco Redhawk Motorhome.